cognitive ability performance have been decreasing over about a 30-year period, and that they're actually much smaller in childhood than they are in adulthood. And that's the one point of optimism that someone very hard-headed might still maintain in relationship to the IQ literature, looking at it on the racial front, is that at the age of 5 or so, the difference between Caucasians and Blacks, for example, is something more approximating 5 points than the, say, 10 to 12 points that seems more standard by adulthood. And no one really knows why that is, why that gap expands across time. And it would be very useful to, at least in principle, to focus our sociological and psychological investigations into determining why that is. I suspect phenomena like fatherlessness play a role. I also suspect that early literacy is relevant. You know, that in the typical middle-class family, a kid of, forget race for a minute, if you look at the typical middle-class family compared to the typical working-class family, a typical middle-class kid by the age of 3 or 4 has been exposed to a veritable plethora of books and semantic information compared to a working-class kid, all things being equal. And the differences in exposure magnitude is absolutely remarkable, even by the age of 3. And so there's still some places we might look if we were really interested in remediating the remaining differences in general cognitive ability. So, but...
Well, we've tried that. I mean, this is the whole Perry preschool experiment. And absolutely, this has been noted, the difference in the number of words that children hear from poor and middle-class backgrounds. And I would absolutely agree with that. One question is the failure to surround lower-class children with rich verbal environments, is that a function of just ignorance about good child rearing, or do you get somewhat of a circular loop where it is the lower cognitive level of the parents that results in this type of inadequate, from our perspective? Maybe there's other strengths going on there, I don't know. I've got a kind of an Appalachian white trash couple living underneath me in my California apartment, and I can tell you it's an amazing contrast. There really are class differences that are hilariously stereotypical, but these guys live up to it to the T. I mean, everybody in their environment has no teeth, either because of meth or they're just beat each other up too much. But there's clearly, I would not want to be the child of those parents, and they're not married.
There's both. I mean,
so
the best predictor of the IQ of a child is the average IQ of the parents. And so you definitely get a situation where cognitive resources accumulate. And this is particularly true in the modern world, because modern high-status women are much more likely to mate. They like women in general, they mate across and up dominance hierarchies, so that as women have become more educated, the proclivity for educated women to only marry educated men, and there's an associated IQ assortative mating phenomenon going on there, that's increased substantially in recent years. And so it is definitely the case that environments that are set up by people who have lower cognitive function are less likely to be literacy-producing environments. But there may be also additional effects where, you know, that could be ameliorated to some degree, because if the parents of a given child are both lower than average in IQ, their child will on average be slightly smarter than them. There's a phenomenon called regression to the mean. And so if you have parents who both have IQs of 145, they don't produce a child with an IQ of 160, they produce a child with an IQ of 130. And if you have two parents with IQs of 85, they produce a child with an IQ of, say, 90 or 95 on average. It's something like that. And so those children could benefit from a richer semantic environment. But the problem with that on the educational front is that, you know, maybe part of the reason the IQ differences are pervasive racially is because there are real differences in literacy culture. But a lot of those might be manifesting themselves as early as 2 years old. You know, because in a literate family, kids at 2 are already sitting and reading often. They're just looking through books, but they have 100 books in their room, and they might spend an hour a day leafing through them. It's proto-literacy behavior. And if you want to instantiate that kind of proto-literate behavior in children that early, you have to adopt a pretty radically invasive neo-colonial attitude towards the lower class family. And that is something that in and of itself is problematic. You know, what do you want every working class family to be mother, father, and well-meaning social worker? I mean, that's a dismal deal for everyone concerned. But it's very hard to intervene at that early.
We had these early preschool experiments that were extremely intensive, and they did produce a narrowing of the